On today's show, after one game at home in 24 days, the Hawks are back on the floor at State Farm Arena on Wednesday evening. We'll get into that, plus your mailbag questions and much more. All that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1892 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. On the other side, that's places like Apple and Spotify. Plus, we are also on YouTube. Please like the video as you are watching it on that platform, and tell your friends about the show, family, et cetera, et cetera. Help us spread the word about the podcast. And yeah, it's been very busy on the podcast in recent days. We had 5 shows last week. We had 2 shows already this week on the win in Boston on Saturday, and then the Hawks lost on MLK Day in New York on Monday. Most of today's show will be driven by you, the listener and viewer of the podcast, with mailbag questions. The mailbag is, by the way, always open. You can send in questions all the time. I'm not always going to put out a call necessarily for them, but I'll always take them for sure on Twitter, which you can find out the show at Locked On Hawks. I am on there at BT Rowland. Plus, I'm on Blue Sky at BT Rowland, and also in the YouTube comments here. Plus, you can email the show at lockedonhawks@gmail.com or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/BT Rowland. By the way, at the end of the show, we'll get into a little bit of a look ahead to Hawks Pistons on Wednesday. But without any more delay, we'll dive in now to the mailbag, and the first question comes from Trip. What can the Hawks do with Bogey? I think they need to trade him, but if they don't, does he need to be shut down for a while? Is he injured? He's really hurting them right now, and it's obvious to everyone. First of all, thanks for the question. As always, if you missed it, I talked about Bogdanovic quite a bit on the show on Monday after the Knicks game, basically just outlined that he's really struggled in recent days, plus in that game. And really all year long, it's been a rough season for Bogey. That's not really a huge surprise or a secret. That's just the reality. It is important to note to me that it's still a pretty small sample size, generally speaking, especially because he's been, pretty good in the past, obviously. Last year, he was awesome and durable. People always say, he was always hurt. Last year, played 79 games. He was durable. He was on the floor. He was really, really good last year. Played great this summer for Serbia. That is all notable, but it's been bad this year. Both can be true at the same time, especially lately. In the last 4 games, he is 6 of 31 from the field and 4 of 25 from 3. We saw his 110-game streak of three-point shots made in each, at least one in every game, end on Monday, and he's now down to 52% true shooting for the season, which is a career low and a below-average figure. All that thrown in the pile, it's not been very good for Bogey this year as an efficiency person. Plus, it isn't just the shooting. His assist rate's down this year. That's not like a huge surprise. There's a little bit, it's not they're not playing through him as much as they have in the past, but still, that's a notable data point. And he's given the Hawks absolutely nothing inside the arc. Now, obviously, Bogey is best known for his perimeter shooting. He's had some great highs as a perimeter shooter. I think he's been basically one of the top 15, 20 shooters in the league over a long period of time, 5-6 years. But he's always had some juice beyond that. Like, the comparison that I would make from a Hawks perspective is that Garrison Matthews is a pure specialist. He almost always just shoots threes. That's what he's out there to do. Bogey is a shooter, but also has in the past been able to run an offense, run a pick and roll, get to the rim sometimes. There's been almost none of that this year compared to previous seasons. Perhaps that can be traced to his health and some movement challenges this year, but he's only attempting 5 2-point shots per 100 possessions this year. That is, for reference, in the previous 4 years with the Hawks, he was about 8.5, 9 per 100. So basically almost having his shots inside the arc on a rate basis is a very notable dip there. So that's one way of looking at this numbers wise, but also the Hawks have been way worse with him on the floor offensively this year, especially since he came back from the injury a couple weeks ago. And that is wild considering the considering the history where they've always been at their best on offense when he's played. That has always been the case. No matter what the Hawks have been doing, when Bogey's been good and out there, the Hawks have always had better numbers on off splits, all that stuff with him on the floor. This year, not so much. Now, there might be some noise in that. It's a pretty small on-off sample. But Bogey is definitely killing them right now. Like, that's not really up for debate. And, I got both reactions yesterday. People were like, you're being too hard on Bogey. I'm not. Like, I've defended Bogey, and as you'll hear in a second, like, I think that he can come out of this I've been a champion of how good and important Bogey has been for a long time. He is not playing well. That is not up for debate, honestly, if you're watching the games. It's just whether he can come out of this or not. So I mentioned a second ago that his movement and health stuff could be a big factor here. And I'll just say this. He's not moving well at all. Maybe it's the age. He's not that old, but it's notable that he's in his 30s now, etc. But he looked far better to me, health-wise, explosiveness-wise, physically, earlier this season. So it's not like it's been a season-long trend. He's been on the injury report this year with all kinds of things. Like he had the right hamstring issue for a while, right knee issue, left quad, left lower leg, all that stuff's been on the injury report at times. And to the question of whether he should be shut down a little bit this year, that's not something that I would be able to wholly answer. Like I'm big on the podcast. If you're just finding the podcast now, I like to tell you what I know and what I don't know. And I'm not a medical professional. So if the medical staff believed that Bogey could benefit physically from being out for a while, like sitting out for a week or something like that, then yeah, I'd be all on board with that. From where I sit right now, we can't know that. So like I do think it's logical sometimes to think, give a guy a break for a while, maybe he gets better, gets healthier, whatever. That does make sense to me, but it's not always a foolproof thing. So I would just say this again. If the staff thought that he could be beneficial from that, I would say that it's a good idea, probably. I think people kind of quick to point that out sometimes, but I did watch more film of him today in preparation for this podcast. And even compared to earlier this season, he's just not moving well. I would encourage you to watch Bogey for a little while. Like watch the game, not watch the ball, just watch Bogey move around. He's not moving very well. And, he was not always a great athlete anyway, but there's some pops there for Bogey in the past. That's not there right now, which hurts you on offense and on defense. Obviously, the defense it's not been good for Bogey for a little while now, but all that's notable to me, and it's all put in there to one big formula. I'll get to the trade part of a question in a second, but I got a question also from Caden about whether the Hawks should just stop playing Bogey entirely. And I do get that question, especially again over the last 4 games in particular, he's been brutal, and they would have been better off without him, honestly. But I would also be rather shocked if Bogey was healthy and available and just didn't play, if that makes sense. Like if it's a back-to-back, rest him or whatever. If he is injured, obviously that speaks for itself. But I would be surprised if Bogey was active for a game and didn't play. Now, crazier things have happened. I would say that. I think that it would probably need to have a pretty long period of time of him being terrible for the Hawks to just DMP him, given his history, their investment in him. They love him. That's why he's still on the roster, for instance. And also, notably, the Hawks don't have like incredible options behind him. I saw some people calling for Daquan Plowden over him this week. I get that, given the one game that Plowden played, but we can probably be civil about this and say, Bogey's obviously well ahead of Plowden on the depth chart. Also, Plowden's more of a forward anyway. But all that said, like, it's a drastic option. I think they'd be more likely to give Bogey a break for a week than to have him active and not play him. But that's an educated guess. I'm not reporting that at this point in time. Last thing on the question is the trade aspect. So I'll say it's pretty tricky. For one, if you trade him right now, you are selling low to some degree. Now, sometimes you have to sell low in the trade business because not everyone always comes back up. Like rebuilding value is not like easy to do. It can also fall further. And the Hawks do owe him money in the future. But the big picture answer is that, yes, you could trade him right now in the next 2 weeks. Because right now, between now and the deadline, which is literally like 15 days away, as of recording this podcast, it's about 2 weeks. It would probably depend on what the offer was. And for me, we're still at the point where you don't just trade Bogey to trade him for no reason. He's not like a dump candidate for me at this moment in time. I made some calls this week to ask around the league about Bogey's trade value. And I don't think actually that people have really swung their opinion on Bogey too much in a negative direction around the league. I think Hawks fans are very obviously lower on Bogey than the league is at this moment, which makes sense. They're watching him every game. I get that. But people around the league remember how good he was last year. Like he got multiple first place votes in Sixth Man of the Year last year. I think he should have won it and would have won it if the Hawks were a better team last year. He was that good. Plus, he was really good this summer. All that said, also he has a great reputation around the league as a valuable player. I'm not saying that he would come in and be like a number one option for somebody, but for a contending team that wanted like a sixth man option, he would be pretty appealing to a lot of teams. The shooting that he has, et cetera, competitiveness, veteranosity, all of that fun stuff. So I think people are going to remember how good he was in a bigger sample than this year. At the same time, I do think that the Hawks would get less now than they would have gotten for him in July. That's just a natural thing. On the other side of this, by the way, and this is a different podcast altogether, the Hawks could not trade DeAndre Hunter a year ago, 6 months ago. And now, if they traded him today, I think you'd probably be able to have positive value on him. So, like, this stuff does change pretty quickly, relatively so. Anyway, so I would say it's still, from what I got the feedback on, I agree with this, generally speaking. It's still a good contract. $17 million this year, about 12% of the salary cap for a guy who is like a very solid 6th, 7th man on the team is a very good value. Also, it goes down next year to about 10% of the cap. That's a very low number for a rotation player. And then there's a team option after that. Not a player option, a team option. So it's a only surplus value thing for the team. So you either pick it up if you want to or decline it for no money. It's a very good team-friendly deal, I would say. Now, again, it looks worse than it did 6 months ago. I'll grant you that. But it's still, I think, around the league viewed as a positive contract, generally speaking. But if it's still like this in 2 months, if he plays this way the rest of the season, you go to the summer, it won't be anymore. So there is a little bit of a fine line to walk there. I will certainly admit that. So overall, what I would say is Bogey is, of course, not playing well. He's not moving well. He might not be 100% physically. That would be the hope, honestly, if I was a Hawks fan, if I was the Hawks in general, is that Bogey just got to get healthy. There have been times during his stretch in Atlanta for the last 5 years where he's not looked good physically. He kind of gets right physically and takes off. That has happened before. It could happen again. And I do believe firmly he will be better from this moment on than he's been to this point. I believe that. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my guess, my projection, my analysis, etc. And I don't think that you can trade him necessarily. Could the Hawks trade him? Yes. Would it be reasonable if they could get a good offer? Sure, it would be. But you don't have to trade him. I saw lots of reactions about that. Like, they have to trade him out. No, they don't. They don't have to. They can. They don't have to. But I think that they also could, if he plays poorly, have a short leash on him. We saw it's one game, but on Monday, he played very little. He played way less than he's really ever played when healthy because he was really bad. And that's maybe that's the big change in the present. So it's been frustrating for sure. If all the guys on the Hawks roster that have played real minutes this year, he has had the worst season compared to what you would expect, if that makes sense. You know, Trey, Jalen, Hunter, Capela, Okongwu, name all your players. If you said, okay, here's a projection coming into the season, the guy who has fallen the furthest below his projection is Bogey. It's pretty obviously Bogey, honestly. It's not even close. So hopefully that improves. The Hawks can still really use Bogey. His shooting is very valuable to this team, all that stuff. But he's got to hopefully get healthy, get right, and we'll see what happens. If he's not even on the team in a couple of weeks. All right, more to come on the podcast, including trade stuff, draft stuff, Pistons preview, etc. All this coming up in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, or theater. As it's really one of my favorite memories of last year is actually attending a concert. The energy and excitement there was really palpable and awesome. And now there are picks at Game Time to make it even easier to get you tickets for favorite events with their new feature, and it's called Game Time Picks. They filter out all the stuff that you actually don't want and show you the incredible deals and great seats. No wasting time with searches through thousands of different tickets that you actually are not interested in. Recently, I looked for tickets for a football game using the Game Time app, and with Get Time Picks, I actually found amazing deals. I also see the view from the seats before buying them, and they have the super deal function that's particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing is really, really, really convenient and shows the total cost up front. No surprise fees at the checkout process at the end of the entire way. And take all the guesswork out of buy tickets right now with the folks at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account at Game Time and use that code. It's LOCKEDONNBA, locked on NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, a question from Erwin who says, does the starting lineup change mean anything with how the Hawks might look at Capela as a trade candidate? If not, does that mean that they could actually trade Larry Nance when he comes back? The short answer is that there's still 2 weeks to go. It could mean something. In general, though, I think fans were probably assigning way too much significance about trade stuff to the starting lineup change on Monday. Also, notably, again, 2 weeks till the deadline. At this moment, no one from the Hawks organization, and I mean really Quinn, has given any kind of context about why they did what they did. Now, Quinn does not generally directly answer questions, but he didn't give anything about after the game on Monday. They didn't practice today. So, maybe they'll have some grand reveal about their plans I even said last night, it wouldn't stun me if they went back to Capela on Wednesday. We'll see. I would guess they probably don't, but we'll see on that. Anyway, it's a interesting kind of like in between right now because like the deadline is still 2 weeks away, but we're kind of getting closer and closer. As a reminder, Capela's on an expiring contract. He's always been a potential trade candidate, but it's not like the Hawks have to move him, similar to Bogey, if there isn't a potential trade candidate out there. Also, having a Okongwu making very little, $14 million is really helpful because that's actually an exceptionally cheap price if he's going to be the starter long term, and that's still a big if to some degree. But that helps kind of aid in flexibility and not having to do anything rash if you don't want to. But also, they don't really have a natural replacement for Capela. Now, I say that. I get that they have Larry Nance. Now, Larry Nance is hurt right now, and people are pining for him because they don't like Capela. Whatever. That's for a later day. Nance is obviously more skilled offensively, good shooter for the position, all that stuff. But when you face teams that put pressure on the rim offensively and or teams that have big physical centers, they do need Capela. He has on-court value. I'm not saying you have to start him, but he does have a lot of on-court value still, no matter what hot take you might see out there. I know fans don't agree with that, and that's fine. But I believe, and I know the Hawks believe, that if you just took Capela off the team, they would get worse. Again, I get the Hawks fans won't agree with that statement. I firmly believe that, and I know the Hawks do as well. If you just ejected Capela from the earth, they would be worse. How much worse? Debate that if you want to. But the drop from Capela to Dom Barlow or Moget or Larry Nance is still hurt right now, but Larry Nance is notable, especially on defense. And the Hawks still, halfway through the season, the most notable gains the Hawks have made this year have been on defense, not on offense, on defense. And Dyson's the reason for that, like the biggest reason for that. But Capela is a big reason why the defense is pretty good. That's the reality. Anyway, I won't rehash all of what I said on the podcast yesterday, but I am still totally fine and on board if the Hawks want to play Okongwu 28 minutes a game, 30 minutes a game, whatever. And Capela plays the other 18 to 20. But those minutes still matter. Like, you still want to have two good centers, especially when your starter, while Okongwu's been playing great, he's not like Jokic out there. Like, they don't have a full-blown star center. So to have a good backup, and that's what Capela is, that's fine. But he's still a good backup. Quickly on Nance, by the way, the Hawks said Friday he'll be reevaluated again in a week. That was just a cursory update because they were 2 weeks away from the surgery. So it's hard to tell like how close he actually is. He's been around the team. It's the hand, so we'll see what happens there. But he could be back sometime soon, but we just don't know the timing on that. And look, I've been saying since the summer, the Hawks could trade Nance. They could have done it this summer. They could do it now. He is very movable on that contract. It's only $11 million. Like, teams would want Larry Nance as a backup big, basically. He's flexible, plays the 4, plays the 5, the shooting. Great veteran in the locker room. Like, he's a pretty easy guy to move if the Hawks want to. But the Hawks might want to keep him long-term. Like, he's not signed long-term, but it's easier to keep him in your building if you don't trade him. Maybe you extend him for cheap or you sign him to summer with bird rights or whatever. That's a possibility too. So stay tuned on that. I would say it shouldn't surprise anyone if the Hawks were to trade Capela or Nance in the next 2 weeks. But I'm not guaranteed that they will do it by any means. And I think that it comes down to what's available. And crucially, as we'll probably talk about a little bit more closer to the deadline, like, what does the organization actually want right now? Are they buying to try to win? Are they trying to look for the future? Are you straddling the line? It's an interesting question. The Hawks are very nuanced because, like most teams, it's either like you're buying or you're selling. The Hawks are firmly in the middle right now because they're in the middle of standings, but also don't have their pick, all those things. Like, it's a pretty interesting situation that we'll get into more later on, but that's hopefully a decent answer on the question that we were asked. Next one comes from Jackson, who says, I'm starting to get into the draft this year. I'm wondering what your philosophy would be for the Hawks in 2025. If you shared this with Brian, I think I missed it. So I did, to the question from Jackson, get into some Hawks-inspired draft stuff with Brian Schroeder about 10 days ago on the podcast. It was a 2-part episode about the NBA draft. It was not all Hawks stuff. It was generally draft overall, but some Hawks tangents, including especially the center focus that we did, because Hawks fans definitely interested in centers for the upcoming class. Calvin Malawak, all those guys. I did briefly share my view on that podcast, but my conversation was mostly like broad on purpose. And I do cover the whole draft, not just the Hawks draft. But it's really hard right now because we don't know where the Hawks are going to be picking. That is part of the challenge right now. I will have much more stuff on Hawks-specific targets later on. But the Hawks not having their own pick and also having at least one pick, maybe 2 picks, like, it would not surprise me if they had a top 10 pick with the Lakers if they fall off the earth or, all that stuff. But as I record this podcast on Tuesday, they'd be picking 18th from the Kings and 20th from the Lakers. But like as of like 3 or 4 days ago, the Kings pick was like the 12th pick in the draft. So like there's a lot of variability in that middle range, so TBD on all that. But to the question on the Hawks draft philosophy for this year, I would say I keep it much more general than some others might have at this juncture. People have been saying that the Hawks, quote unquote, have to take a center or whatever. I would not say that at all. Or they have to take a forward or a shooter or a guard or whatever. Center is the one that I hear the most about. But no matter what, I would say the Hawks are not in a spot where they have to draft any position or archetype at all. Now, preferences, sure. If they might want to find a center for the future. That might be a priority. But it's not like the only thing they could possibly do, if that makes sense. My viewpoint is basically the Hawks have stuff that they like, traits, skills, personality stuff, even culture stuff that they like in the draft. But from an overall standpoint, they can draft pretty much any position in the first round. Like, there's stuff that I would like preference-wise, skill set-wise. Like, I would not like to have a center that's a bad defender, for instance, to me, in a vacuum. But it's not like a total no-go. I just wouldn't love to have that with the Hawks and with Trey and all that stuff. But the only thing that I probably would not do with a top 20 pick is draft a small guard who can't play with Trey. Any other thing could really work. Like, you can't have too many forwards. You can't have too many wings. If you find a center that you like, shooting, all that stuff. Like, it's pretty much just I wouldn't draft a small guard that can't play with Trey. That's pretty much the whole list. And even then, if that's a guy that's like a giant tier above everybody else, then you just take him and figure it out later. But there you go. By the way, there are plenty of guards who can play with Trey. So that's not like a cross-off. It's just the guys who can't. Like, for instance, with Kobe Buffkin, who's still on this team right now, he has the size and defense to play with Trey in theory. So that was why that made some sense. It wasn't just like he was drafting a point guard. He's 6'5" and is a good defender and all that stuff. What I wouldn't do is draft a 5'10" guy who can't play defense. Anyway, so we'll see. I think you're largely best player available in the draft. Again, long way to go. If the Hawks make trades, that might change. But they might have 2 picks. They might have 1. I probably will end up telling everyone on the podcast that I think they should take best player available in June. Maybe within a tier, you get 2 preferences about skill set and whatever. But I generally would be like, all right, top player on the board for me. Take them. We'll see. I do tend to lean to wings and forwards because you can't have too many of those guys. But they could also have 2 picks. And if they do that, maybe they draft 1 and trade 1 or package the picks or whatever. That's all coming down the pike later on. But, TBD, but I think that's my overall philosophy. Just like evaluate the board, take the guy you think is the best player at both spots if you need to. They may not want 2 rookies, but rookies are also cheap. So that's also a give and take there as well. So long way to go, but that's a good, hopefully, encapsulation of what I think about the Hawks draft at this moment. All right, let us preview a little bit of the Hawks-Pistons game on Wednesday. As I mentioned at the very, very top of the show, the Hawks have played 1 home game in 3+ weeks, which is crazy. Part of that was the postponement, of course, of the Rockets game. That'll be made up in about a week. But the team did not practice today because they have 3 games in 4 nights at home. They have Detroit Wednesday, and then they have Toronto on Thursday and on Saturday. As a note right now, I'm recording this podcast on Tuesday evening. People are asking me about this. The Hawks don't really give a weather update, generally speaking. Obviously, there is snow in Atlanta. They could postpone the game, similarly to what happened last Saturday against Houston. We may not know that. We probably won't know that, I would say, if I had to guess, until Wednesday. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this. It might have already been postponed. Forgive me. But that's where we are right now. They have, as of now, they're playing, and I assume they will play until I'm told that they won't. So there you go. By the way, the Raptors are not good. So those are favorable games on paper. Obviously, nothing is easy in the NBA, but those are interesting, I would say, favorable matchups. But the Pistons are having their best season in like 6 or 7 years. They're not great, but they're pretty decent. In fact, they have about the same record as the Hawks. They're 22-21. Atlanta is 22-20, so they're half game apart right now. The Pistons are actually beat the Hawks this year on November 8th up in Detroit by a 1-point margin. I was actually at that game, and you might remember this if you were watching the game at that point, but that was a sequence at the end of the game in which Cade Cunningham made the game winner with 10 seconds to go, and then also blocked a Okongwu at the buzzer to save the victory. So that was it was an interesting back and forth game. As a reminder, also Trey had 35 and 13. The Hawks played pretty well for like 2.5 quarters, but they had an absolutely terrible start to that game. They were down 24 points in the first half, and they came all the way back and they almost won, but that was a game that they kind of lost in the first quarter, honestly. But since then, the Pistons are playing really well, I would say. They started 11-17, but they're 11-4 in the last 15 games. Now, there's been some good fortune in that run for Detroit. It's not a Pistons podcast, but they've been fortunate in some close games, beat some bad teams, etc. But they're also playing better. They have a +3 net rating in that stretch, which is not going to equate to 11-4, but still, they are playing pretty well. They're not great on offense or defense. They're a little bit better defensively than offensively this season. Interestingly, they're actually really good on the defensive glass, but the Hawks smoked them on the offensive glass in the first meeting. So it's one game, but they're generally really good in that area. So that's an area to maybe circle in the rematch. And they're about average elsewhere. Offensively, it's the Kay Cunningham show a lot. If you missed it, I talked about Eastern Conference All-Star stuff with Robbie Calland last week on the show. And I think Cade is an all-star right now pretty clearly for me. About 25 points per game, 9 assists per game. Like, he's having a great season, generally speaking. They're not great on the margins offensively, other than the glass. Like, there's a lot of turnover issues for the Pistons. They don't get a lot to the line. But I would say overall, they are way better than they have been in previous years. So if you're not watching the league and Pistons, like, this is not the Pistons of previous years. Like, this is a competent basketball team. They're well coached, etc. I think they'll probably be in the play-in if I had to guess. Like, I think they probably won't be a 500 team if I had to guess right now. But a win total probably in like the high 30s would be what I would project for the Pistons. Like, they're a pretty good, frisky team. They have a really good player in Cade and decent depth around them. Injury-wise, Jalen Johnson is listed as questionable with the right shoulder problem he's been dealing with for a while now. That is notable and not in a good way because he was probable before the Knicks game on Monday, and now he's back to questionable. So it could be a step back. We just don't know right now from the practice today. So we'll see if he can go. Obviously, the Hawks would be much worse without him. That's always been the case, but keep that in mind. Also, Zachary Ricochet is out still with the adductor strain. The Hawks actually gave an update earlier today on Tuesday and said that he is, quote, progressing in his rehab and will be reevaluated in approximately 1 week. As a reminder, Ricochet played the first 39 games in a row for Atlanta, but now he will have missed 4 games in a row as of Wednesday. And if you assume he'll be out for the whole week as they reevaluate him, it'll be at least 7 straight games for Ricochet. So obviously, he's still played a lot more than a lot of rookies have, but it's at least somewhat concerning he's not back on the floor yet. It's a adductor, so it's kind of a strange injury. And we'll see on that. He's not a massive, like, present-day absence for the Hawks. They can still certainly use him. He's not as important as, like, Jalen or Hunter or Trey or whatever. But his defense is very helpful in lineups for the Hawks. You'd rather have him playing than not playing if you're Atlanta. But he is a rookie, so the actual present-day drop-off is not very big. But he's still a guy that you're hugely invested in long-term, so you want him to be healthy and playing TBD there. On the Pistons side, Jaden Ivey is actually out. He actually suffered an injury about 3 weeks ago that was pretty bad, actually. But other than that, he's the only guy that's out for the Pistons, and everyone else set to play, at least as of now, on Tuesday evening. Our friends at FanDuel make the Hawks a 2.5-point favorite in the game. That's probably a little bit of a hedge on Jalen Johnson. I think if the Hawks have Jalen, my guess is that number might go up a little bit. If the Hawks do not have Jalen, that number might go down a little bit. So right now it's kind of like, all right, Hawks are favored slightly at home. Makes sense. But if Jalen's in or out, that might swing things a little bit in either direction. Also, there's no like rest advantage in this game. The Pistons played on Monday as the Hawks did. They both had to travel after the game. Detroit is coming from, not Orlando. Where did it? Oh, they came from Houston, where they actually beat the Rockets. And then Atlanta, of course, coming back from New York. So it'll be interesting. I think the Hawks are the better team, but not by a ton. So that'll be a challenge. Maybe a little bit of a revenge spot after that close loss this year. But yeah, certainly a nice test. It'd be good if the Hawks get this one, obviously, after losing on Monday. It isn't a disaster if they lose, big picture. Like, if they get blown out, then yeah, it would be a bad loss for sure. But 3 games in 4 nights, like, I know it's the Raptors looming, but you don't want to lose the first one if you can help it. So that's where we are right now as of Tuesday into Wednesday. And again, we'll keep an eye on the weather. If things are on track as always, I'll be in the building. If not, then we'll reset that later on this week. And hopefully the Hawks will have some basketball games at home because they just haven't played at home in a very long time, other than 1 game in the middle of that run. All right, everybody. That's all I have on today's show. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. Please follow the show on YouTube as well and like the podcast there. If you are a video watcher primarily, that's totally fine. I love that. Thank you for listening and watching on that platform. If you could do me a favor and also subscribe and download an audio platform, that'd be great too. Just help the show the best possible way. I appreciate the support in a big way. Ratings and reviews appreciated. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow me on Blue Sky if you want to at BT Rowland. I'm also, you can follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. I really do appreciate it. I'll have a podcast, provided there's a game. I'll have a podcast on Wednesday night. If not, stay tuned. We'll have a podcast later on this week, and we'll see you all next time.